All right. Welcome in, everybody. Thanks for joining Biscuits and SEC Live. This is our 21st live show. In case you are new here, we are Biscuits and SEC. I'm Hammer. That is Bossman, a.k.a. Hank and Alex. We are a SEC, mostly football blog, newsletter, and now this live show coming to you weekly on Wednesday nights at 7 Eastern. Before we hop into it tonight, we're brought to you by the Steer Agency, and would really appreciate it if you would follow us on socials at Biscuits and SEC and sign up for our newsletter. You can see below the link there. It's just our website that takes you to the main blog /newsletter. Also, if you just go to the website, there will be a pop-up that will ask you to subscribe. So we would greatly appreciate that. Got a good show planned where we're getting to what we missed out on last week because we took too long having a good discussion, but it just went a lot longer than we had anticipated on some of the hot seat stuff going into next year. I think it's a very interesting discussion, especially with no coaching turnover this past season, which is a rarity. So I think there's a lot of guys that either are on the hot seat or if things go wrong could certainly find themselves there next year. So tonight we're going to be breaking down just some SEC quarterback talk going into next year, specifically like who's under the most pressure and kind of where we think some of those things are going to shake out. And then we'll talk a little bit of hoops too as we close out the show with the SEC tournament coming up next week and then the NCAA tournament shortly thereafter. So, let's get into it. Bossman, how you doing tonight?
Doing good. Just want to let everybody know I've been marked safe from the Texas dust storm that happened yesterday. It was looking a little apocalyptic there in Dallas. Down here in Austin, it was kind of the same. It was a little crazy looking outside. There was dust everywhere. In fact, I went outside for about 2 minutes and could feel the dust kind of all over me. I was like, all right, I'm done with this. Went straight back inside. But I am marked safe from the apocalyptic dust storm in Texas of 2025. Otherwise, hope everybody's doing well. Got to Ash Wednesday service today, so hope everybody had a good Fat Tuesday, good Ash Wednesday, getting ready for Lent. And it is going to be a lot of fun to talk tonight about the QB situations heading into 2025, who's got the most pressure, and then some of these battles also that are taking place in some big places like in Athens and in Tuscaloosa. So looking forward to getting into it.
Absolutely. Well, I think we should jump right into it. So as we said off the jump, we're kind of just talking about, QB pressure. Like who do we think it's going to be under the most pressure, this coming year? And then obviously we'll talk some about battles and how we think that'll shake out. But I'll kick it to you to start. So we've got a little graphic here. This is your QBs under the most pressure, I believe. Reading this, it's going from left to right. So we've got Arch at the top spot, followed by Nico, the Georgia QB, Gunnar Stockton and or Ryan Puglisi, then Nuss, the Alabama quarterback, whoever that is, Simmons, Sellers, John Mateer, and I missed Lagway, and then Arnold down there. So pretty deep list. But I'll just kick it to you to start off with, explaining your list, and then we can kind of get into some of this stuff too, with what we're thinking.
Sure. So I'm interested to hear, when we talk about your list, kind of how you came up with your quarterbacks and who was under the most pressure and why. Mine, I really based it. I'll put it back up here for a second so folks can see it again. But I based it on fan expectations, right? I talked about that a lot in terms of my teams in the SEC East and the SEC West, quote unquote. I know there's no longer divisions now, but we split them up there that way over the last two shows in order to do our grades. And so that I weighted heavily the fan expectations for a program. And I thought about this in terms of my quarterbacks under the most pressure for this week and going into 2025. And I tried to, one of my criteria, my big criteria was the fan expectations for these programs and for these quarterbacks. And I thought for a little bit about putting Arch Manning down a little bit lower than you had him. But the more I thought about it, the more it just makes sense that Arch is number one. He's got all the hype in the world coming in. He's the 5-star. He's the darling. He's, he's this, he's that. He's a Manning. And when you couple that, by the way, like, let's remember that there's a lot of people in the Texas fan base who have been calling for Arch Manning over Quinn Ewers and did so last year during the season. They did so before the season last year. We can debate whether or not they were correct, but needless to say, that conversation is over now, and Arch Manning is the guy. And so, based on what I just said, how much expectation was on Arch coming into Texas, the fans, kind of calling for him at times during last year, and then the expectations on Texas, right? We've had 2 straight college football playoff appearances, and now it's time to get over the hump. It's time to win a national championship, and a lot of Texas fans think that Arch can do that. So I'm with you. We'll get to your list in a bit, but you and I know have both of us have Arch at number one. So Arch number one.
I think.
Go ahead.
Sorry to cut you off. I was going to say, just to just start this off, I think I'll throw mine up there too, and then we can kind of hit on what my thought process was, and then we'll start going down the list and then discuss kind of where we differ. There's not a whole lot of difference, but there is a little bit. So here's my list. Again, I've got Arch at number one. I had Nussmeier at 2, so 1 spot higher, actually 2 higher than you, followed by Nico, who I think you had at number 2. Then I have the Bama QB, followed by Sellers, Lagway, Mateer, and then Arnold. So yeah, a little bit of a difference, but I think a pretty consistent, if you were to track like the trend, like there's not a whole lot of difference there, but I'm with you on Arch. Almost just just because of his last name. I mean, he was the number 1 recruit a couple of years ago. He's a Manning. People have been in and outside of Austin, dying to see this kid play. And Texas has been to the college football playoff Final Four 2 years in a row. 2 years ago with the 14 playoff, and this past year by winning 2 games with Ewers to get there. So the expectations are extremely high as a program from that fan base, and then with him being a Manning and his recruiting profile and some of the stuff we've seen, because he has played a little bit in relief of Ewers. I think it starts and ends with Arch in terms of who's under the most pressure this coming season.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. How many stories do we have to see from ESPN and CBS Sports and everybody else, right? If Arch Manning sneezes, everyone across the country hears about it. So he's like the LeBron, right, of college football right now. All the eyes are on him. Doesn't matter what network, who's covering the sport. All eyes are on Arch, and we'll see, what happens with that. Some people crumble under that pressure. Others don't. Others rise to the occasion. So I have a feeling he's going to rise to the occasion, but we'll see. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's start going down the list. So you had at number 2, you had Nico. I had Nussmeier. I had Nico at 3. So let's dive into Nico here, since he's in both of our top 3s, and see, from my perspective, I think kind of similar to Arch, a lot of the expectation here goes back to the recruiting stuff, right? So Nico was, if y'all remember, which I'm sure most of our viewers do, how whenever year, 2-3 years ago now this was, when he was recruited, after the floodgates of NIL opened, he was one of the first guys reportedly to sign a monster deal. I believe at the time it was an $8 million deal reported. Who knows what he's actually getting or what he got or what the structure looks like. But he was tabbed as the $8 million quarterback. He sits for a year behind Joe Milton. Then he gets his shot last year. And I think everyone can agree that the result in year 1 was a little bit underwhelming. The team did well. Nico did not play poorly, but for what they were expecting, he, I think, underperformed expectations. So I just think that the expectations are extremely high on him returning as the starter, being his 3rd year in the program. Tennessee also made the 12-team playoff. They expect to make the playoff again, and I think they expect him to make a big jump in 2025.
Totally agree. I put Nico ahead of Nussmeier at number 2 because I think it's, we're splitting hairs here, in my opinion, in terms of the most pressure. Because LSU, we know the fan base. We know how much fire Brian Kelly, right? They were chanting that, at the end of the Alabama game last year. So there's a lot of pressure at LSU. LSU fans expect to win. They expect to win championships. So I understand that. But Tennessee, at this point, is now also in that category. Tennessee has fought their way back to the point that Josh Heupel has the fans expecting to be in the national title conversation, especially with a quarterback like Nico. Nico kind of was viewed as the next step, the savior, quote unquote, of the Tennessee program in order to bring them to that next level. So, and the fact that Tennessee is ahead of LSU in terms of where they're at as a program. Tennessee just made the college football playoff. Right, Tennessee was 10-2 in the regular season last year. So, to me, the fan expectations now for Tennessee are meeting the fan expectations of LSU, and that's they're a championship program too, right? Like feels like '98. It's it's been a while, but Tennessee fans expect to win, and they've got a storied history. So, I think that, and the other piece of that too with Nico is kind of what you touched on, which is the way that he played this year. He didn't meet expectations this year. That's just flat out the truth, right? Like any of us who watched his games, any Tennessee fan who watched his games, it was very frustrating to watch at times. Sometimes you could see it, right? There were flashes where you're like, okay, that's why we paid this kid $8 million or whatever it was, right? That's why we brought this kid from California all the way across the country to Knoxville. And then there were times where he was inaccurate. He wasn't making good decisions. He's not making reads quickly. Which in a Heupel offense, it's supposed to be quick, right? There's not supposed to be a whole lot of reading, but he was still having trouble with the read. So, yeah, I know he was young. I get it, right? That's what Tennessee fans, I've heard plenty of Tennessee fans say, hey, he was young. Give him some time this year. Watch, he's going to make that next step. And there's probably a lot of truth in that, right? I think in college football these days, we give up on quarterbacks way too quickly, way too easily. If folks remember, right, like in the 90s, early 2000s, sometimes kids would sit or they would play for 3 years and then bam, by their junior year, their senior year, they were looking like, All-Americans or Heisman candidates, all ACC, all SEC, what have you. So maybe Nico can make that step this year, but a lot of pressure on his shoulders, no doubt.
Yeah, I think just to hit on one thing you said there about him underperforming expectations, which we're in agreement on. And again, I think the fan base is in agreement on that he underperformed expectations. I do think there's something to be said there, though, that you touched on at the end of like, he was young, so maybe the expectations were too high. Maybe the NIL coupled with him just being a 5-star were a little bit high because, if we look at his numbers here, that's Arch Manning, but Nico, it was not a bad season, right? I mean, he throws 19 passing touchdowns, runs for 3, only 5 interceptions. But I think what you really see or where he kind of left a lot more to be desired is that with that QBR number, because it was pretty clear just in watching them play this year. Again, I don't know if this is Heupel pulling the reins back or Nico, like you said, just not really reading the defenses or not really being ready to read defenses at a high enough level. But like, there's just something missing there where his accuracy would kind of fall off and they weren't clicking on all cylinders like you would expect an offense to with somebody who has the talent too. That's another thing I think that adds to the, expectation of him. Like, dude, he was a 5-star for a reason. As you mentioned, you saw flashes of, man, he's got a rocket arm. He just wasn't there week in and week out, even game in and game out. Again, there'd be flashes and then he would go a couple quarters and you're just like, man, like we're not really moving the ball. And if we are, it's all Dylan Sampson because Nico's just not pushing the ball downfield. So I think there's a lot of pressure on him to improve that, this season.
One more thing on Nico before we move on, and I'll just say this. I'm looking at the game logs for the stats from last year, right? And for a quarterback of Nico's caliber in an offense like Tennessee's with the weapons that Tennessee has, I know that they do run a lot more than folks think they do. Dylan Sampson, right? Last year, he had a great year running the ball. But they had a lot of weapons last year on the outside. So you would think that Nico would be throwing for 200 yards, even against SEC defenses, right? At least 200 yards, right? A couple of 300-yard games. He had zero 300-yard games passing. And he had, I believe it's 4 games in the 200s passing. Only 2 of those came against the SEC. One of them was against Kentucky, and the other one was, I believe it was against Vanderbilt. Yeah, 257 against Vanderbilt and 292 against Kentucky. That's just not going to cut it. It's not going to cut it. He's going to have to be better going into this year if Tennessee is going to get back to the playoffs and then hopefully make a run at the national title.
Yeah, I totally agree. So we started to touch on Nussmeier there too. So I think we'll jump into him next, and then we can hop into the Georgia QB because you had them at third. I didn't even have them on the top 8 list there. So, but yeah, with Nussmeier, I think the reason I put him slightly ahead of Nico is I guess it's a combination of as you brought up, like the fan expectations. I think LSU always has high expectations, but especially this year, we're going into year 4 of Brian Kelly. Brian Kelly made the comments that we brought up repeatedly on the show about how they're going to win national title. They're national title contenders. And for Nussmeier's piece of this, I think similar to Nico, he has shown all the tools. He's got a good arm. He's not mobile in the sense that he's a runner, but he moves very well in the pocket. And he can make all the throws. His struggle last year to me was mostly just in some decision making. I also think part of that was the overall offense of LSU that we brought up before, that they couldn't really run the ball, but so a lot was placed on his shoulders. But the reason I put him slightly ahead of Nico is because he's a lot older. I believe he's 5th year. He's been in that program the entire time. He has not wavered, has not transferred. So I just looked at that and I'm like, okay, it's now or never. Nico's got more time in theory if he wants it. And Nussmeier, it's like, dude, you got to put up or shut up this year. And fair or not, with, a lot that they're losing on offense on the offensive line and at receiver, but fair or not, a lot of this rests on Nussmeier's shoulders. And you see here too, why I kind of put him above that Nico level is that passing TDs. Again, he's shown the ability to sling it all over the field. He had over 4,000 yards last year. He threw for 29 touchdowns, but again, the 12 interceptions were very costly. But anyway, that's kind of my reasoning there. I just feel like he's a 5th year. He's thrown for 4,000 yards. Like, he's kind of done everything other than win a lot of games. Not that they were a bad team last year, but they finished 8-4. So I think the pressure's on him to exceed what he did last year statistically, but also we got to win some of these ball games.
Yeah, I think you're right. And teams started to figure it out kind of mid to late year in terms of how to attack Garrett Nussmeier, and that was bring freaking pressure. Right. Like if you give him a clean pocket, or if all he has to do is after roll out, a little bit soft, if you just, pressure him a little bit, he just, rolls out and it's just, soft pressure. He's pretty good. But if you can get pressure on him, he struggles. And that was especially apparent in the Texas A&M game, right? The first half, he's looking really good. And then the second half, Mike Elko dialed up pressure after pressure after pressure. And A&M only tallied, I think it was 2 sacks in that game, but go back and watch the second half of that game. There's somebody in the backfield in Nussmeier's face. I can't even remember how many hits he took, right? Like, I would have to dig deep and find out how many pressures A&M got on him in that game, but it was a lot. It was significant. And then you go and look a couple weeks later. Literally the next week they play Alabama, and Alabama's all over them all night, right? And they scored 13 points, right? And I think one of them was a garbage touchdown. So then the next week after that, Florida has 7 sacks, right? So teams started to figure it out. And so that not all of that is on Nussmeier, right? Like that's the offensive line as well. The offensive line this year struggled at times for LSU. As you mentioned, the running game, for whatever reason, LSU has not been able to get the running game going. That's on the offensive line. And then the second piece of that is late in the year, they were not very good in pass pro. So they're going to have to get better at pass pro. And they're going to have to be better along the offensive line if Garrett Nussmeier is going to rise to the occasion, get over the hump and get LSU to the college football playoff. That being said, too, he's got to be better under pressure, right? It's two-way street. He's also got to be better under pressure, and he wasn't that good under pressure this year. He's going to have a lot of weapons to work with, right? They just got Berrien Brown from Kentucky, and I believe they got one or two others.
They got Anderson from Oklahoma, Nick Anderson.
That's right. They're going to be loaded at wide receiver. He's going to have all the weapons that he can handle, just as he did last year. So Garrett Nussmeier, I think it's going to be, like you said, also his coach has put a little bit of pressure on it with the national championship comments, but I don't think that really puts any extra pressure on him, to be honest, because it's LSU. You come to LSU because of that pressure, right? Pressure makes diamonds, and we're here to win national championships and put diamonds on our hands and win rings. So I don't know that adds any extra pressure, but definitely he's a big one under pressure heading into 25.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, as you said, especially with the top ones here, we're kind of splitting hairs. Like you could make the case, and it would be legitimate for any of these guys to have the most pressure on them. The next one I wanted to touch on, I mentioned. So you had Georgia QB, aka Gunnar Stockton or Ryan Puglisi, excuse me, as your third one under pressure. I did not even have them within my top 8. So I'll kick it to you to just explain where you're thinking there, and then I can go into kind of where my mind was at with them.
What are you thinking not having them on the list? That's my question.
Okay, so I'll start.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we've seen, basically since Kirby has gotten there, that they don't need an elite quarterback to win ball games. I think from the fan base or team expectations, of course, they're very high and they expect high level quarterback play, as any elite program would. I just look back to Jake Fromm, to Stetson Bennett, especially early Stetson Bennett. And then, last year with Carson Beck, Carson Beck was terrible last year, and they win the SEC, and they win the SEC title game with Gunnar Stockton, who had never played in his life. And he comes back to lead Texas back. So for me, the reason I don't have them in the top 8 is because it's more so just, I think, how Georgia plays as a team and program, where I don't think they're going to put a lot on their shoulders, whereas, Arch Manning, Nico, Nussmeier, LaNorris Sellers, DJ, all these other guys that I ranked ahead of them, I think they're just going to have a lot more on their plate they're going to have to deliver on. Whereas I think Gunnar Stockton and or Puglisi could be, the 10th best quarterback in the SEC, and Georgia's going to still win 10, 11 games.
Maybe. And that's why I put them up there. And the reason I disagree, and here's why. I think Georgia fans right now are biting their nails and kind of freaking out. And I think that some of that may be seeping into that locker room, maybe at the quarterback position, right? We're heading into a year where also I would argue that Stetson Bennett was an elite quarterback, an elite college quarterback.
No,
most of his time at Georgia.
Yeah, I have no, real argument against that. I think that's a very reasonable take, especially his second year when they repeated. Yeah. He was excellent. So I have no problem with that. With that premise. So in that establishing that thing, Kirby has won his national titles with an elite quarterback, right? Georgia expects to win national titles. The fan base at this point expects to win national titles. And we've had Carson Beck now for 2 years, right, where didn't win a national title. And I think that this is a big, big season in Athens because we're seeing a couple things happen. One
is with NIL and the transfer portal and everything else, what a lot of people thought, including myself, is that the rich were going to get richer. In some ways that has happened. In others it has not. In a lot of ways, the college football is coming back to a lot more parity, in fact, right? And I think we're seeing that with teams like Alabama and Georgia and the SEC teams, some other Ohio State. So Ohio State this year was deeper than anybody, but a lot of them have lost the depth. Georgia, what people will tell you this, right? People inside Athens will tell you Georgia was very, very talented last year. They could have won a national title, but they weren't as deep as those national title teams, and they lost a lot in the portal. So that piece of it, I don't think that Georgia is. They're of course very talented, but I don't think that Georgia is as talented as those national title teams. So they're going to have to do a little bit more in order to win a national title. So you have that. Then you have the fact that you're coming into 2025 with a quarterback competition and unproven quarterbacks. Either way, whatever it is, whether it's Gunner or whether it's Puglisi, it's an unknown. And so I think that you've got both of these kids who are going to feel the pressure of the fan base and feel that pressure that, hey, we can't be the ones that let Georgia slip, right? We need to go back to the national title. So either one that wins this job, I think, is under a tremendous amount of pressure from that fan base to win right now and not let us slip. Because I do think that Georgia, I think Kirby Smart's a great coach. I think he's built an incredible program there at Georgia, but I think they're teetering on the edge of like reverting back to the, kind of the middle of the pack, right? Maybe not being the favorite in the SEC every single year, but being at, hey, 2, 3, 4, 5 range, right? Like up and down there. This is a big year for Georgia in that respect. And that's why I put those guys at number 3.
Yeah, that's, I think that's fair. I think on that, we'll just have to agree to disagree, because I think, again, just kind of what I said before, I think there will absolutely be pressure on whoever wins that job.
Yeah.
Anybody who is the starting quarterback at Georgia will have pressure. I just think we could look up at the end of the year and they could have a stat line, 2,500 yards passing, 20 touchdowns. As long as they take care of the ball, I still think Georgia wins most of their games. And so they may not be, lighting up the stat sheet or in any sort of all SEC or postseason awards conversations. But, I think Georgia can still win with a guy who's more of a quote unquote, game manager. And to your point, can they win a national title that way? Probably not, especially in the 12-team playoff where you're going to have to play, 3 or 4 very good teams to hoist the trophy. But that's kind of my reasoning is the pressure, of course, is there. I don't think the expectations that whoever wins that job will elevate that team or that program are there to the extent of, some of these other guys on the list. That said, we both did have the Bama QB on there. So that's another QB competition we can dive into. So I had them at 4 in terms of most pressure. Whoever wins that job, you had them at 5. So pretty close there. I guess the reason I look at them, because it is a similar scenario in a lot of respects to Georgia. The reason I, put them higher and included them on my list is a couple reasons, especially when you're comparing directly to Georgia. So I would say first, it's Kalen DeBoer. He's an offensive coach. People are going to expect him to have a good quarterback and to produce points on offense. Secondly, for what you were just saying about Georgia, them potentially falling back into the pack, I would push back on that and say they still won the SEC and they were in the final, not 4, but top 8. We got a first round bye in the playoff last year. Bama did not even make the playoff, finished at 9-3. The expectations and the pressure to make the playoff this year, probably to win, a game or two, like the pressure is high on DeBoer in year 2. Therefore, it's very, very high on whoever plays quarterback for them, especially coming off of, the run of quarterbacks that they were on from, and I'll even throw Jalen Hurts in here, but Hurts to Tua to Mac Jones to Bryce Young. I mean, we're talking about Heisman candidates, winners, first-round picks. Jalen Hurts just won a freaking Super Bowl. To Jalen Milroe, who was not that. He was great at times, but very inconsistent. So I think they are thirsty for another playmaker, and I think DeBoer needs that because he has no earned or built up equity in Tuscaloosa. Similar to what we said about Brian Kelly last week, where I don't think DeBoer's on the hot seat, but he's still an outsider. He's new. Nick Saban leaves, and they have the worst season they've had since 2007. So I just think whoever wins that job, man, they are going to be under a ton of pressure to produce. And similar to what I said about Nussmeier, like not just produce, but win games. Like if Bama doesn't win 10 regular season games this year, things could get ugly.
Yeah. Hey, Rick, good to see you tonight. Hope Bama finds their guy. And then also just said we have to make the playoffs this year.
Yeah.
That's the expectation. That's, it's T-Town, title town, baby. We're not here to play school. We're here to play football. And last year just didn't cut it, right? I think that this has been talked about ad nauseum, but, just to kind of drive it home, I think that DeBoer was kind of trying to fit a square peg in a round hole last year with Jalen Milroe in his offense. And Jalen Milroe, I'm not going to hate on the kid. I think that he's an exceptional athlete. At times looks like a great quarterback as well. I'm a little worried that he's like an Anthony Richardson type. I've been saying that for a while that, going into the NFL, to me, he kind of reminds me of like a Malik Willis, but more so even an Anthony Richardson, just because his athleticism is off the charts. But does that necessarily make an amazing quarterback, a great quarterback in the NFL or in college? And the answer to that is no. Kalen DeBoer inherited him last year. And I think that he was trying to do everything around Jalen Milroe, and it just didn't work. There was a lot of different things that went wrong. You could spend, half a show or a whole show on that probably. But going into this year, right, we've got you got Ty Simpson, Keelan Russell, and Austin Mack competing for the job. I have heard, in fact, I think it was Josh Pate that said this the other day. He said, far and away, odds-on favorite, Ty Simpson to win that job. Rick, I know that you've said that as well before. You think it's going to be Ty Simpson, former 5-star, been in the program for 3 years now. So I definitely think that – not definitely. I do think that Ty Simpson probably has the leg up, right? It's his job to lose, in my opinion. Keelan Russell, very, very talented player, but he's a freshman. So they would like to have him sit if they can do that. Austin Mack, coming from Washington, he was recruited by Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubbs. He was a 4-star kid. I'm sure he's very talented. He's just he's one of those kids that's getting overlooked. Maybe he has a Johnny Manziel rise in camp and he's, unbelievable. They have to start the kid. But that's not the way it's looking right now. Or Jalen Hurts over, I believe it was Blake Barnett in Tuscaloosa. That did happen years ago. So that stuff can happen. Keelan Russell coming up. But yes, in terms of the pressure on these kids, big time pressure coming into this year. Like you hit on all the points. Kalen DeBoer going into year 2. Rick, you were talking about it, right? Like you have to make the playoffs this year. I think that is what the feeling is in T-Town. And like you said, there's no built up goodwill. He's not from there. He's not a former coach at Alabama. He's just a winner. And so they're trying to bring him down to Alabama to continue that winning. And the point is winning. And so whoever ends up being the starting quarterback at Alabama, I think has even more pressure on them than Jalen Milroe did last year because of the way that last year went. And at Alabama, you're supposed to win. So,
yeah, I agree. And one more point on this. Rick brings up a good one, and you mentioned him too, Ryan Grubb. Mm-hmm. They got the OC that they want. So in theory, hey, that's great, right? he works well with DeBoer. Last time they were together, Michael Penix goes to the, as a Heisman finalist, and they go to the national title game before ultimately losing to Michigan. So, again, in theory, it's great because you got your guy. We've got our guy, right, to run the offense. However, that adds more pressure because, the excuses, there's no excuses, right? You're checking boxes here, and it's like, okay, we got the coach who's a winner. We got his handpicked OC, who he has a great history with and track record with quarterbacks. So the guy who wins this job, it's like he's going to be expected to be very, very good. And I'm kind of with you. I think Simpson is probably going to be the guy, almost just because, not by default, but the way that college football works now, it's like he hasn't transferred yet. So he's clearly getting he's got some stick-to-itiveness that I can respect, but also he has to be getting good feedback from the coaches, and he has to be seeing in practice that, all right, at the very least, I'm, even with these dudes. Because if he ever got the sense that either Keelan Russell was just going to come in and ball out as a freshman, or Austin Mack, was better than him, he would have packed his bags and moved on, and nobody would blame him. So for the fact that he is sticking around, to me, leads me to believe that he's got a really good chance to win this job. He's probably the favorite. Second year in DeBoer's system, first year under Ryan Grubb, but it's still probably a very similar offense to what, DeBoer would like to run. So, yeah, I think he's probably the favorite. And I think, again, that probably adds to the pressure, right? Because he's been there a long time. Like you said, I think third year, maybe even fourth year in the program. So similar to Nussmeier, it's like, yes, we haven't seen you before, but you're not new around here. If you're coming to win, if you win this job and you step into the starting role, the expectation will be you put up good numbers. You look like maybe Mac Jones did, another guy who bided his time, waited around, didn't hit the transfer portal, got his shot, had a phenomenal year, wins a national title. I'm not saying, that Simpson, if he were to win, that the Mac Jones season would be the expectation. I don't think Devonta Smith, Najee Harris, and all those guys are running around, but the expectations will be extremely high on Simpson if he wins. And if he doesn't, then of course, whoever, ultimately gets it, I think will be very, very high expectations there. So
two quick things on that, I'll just say, and then we can move on. One is that I know that we stopped this and it eventually will stop, but I think that we still have the spring transfer portal window, which is why folks are canceling their spring games.
Yep.
I would not be surprised to see one of these kids transfer, probably Austin Mack, if I had to guess, right?
Yeah,
but
I think Simpson or Mack, like you said, depending on how the spring goes.
Yep. So that's one thing to watch out for. The other thing I would say too is something that could take some pressure off of these kids, whoever ends up winning the starting job, is the running game. Alabama's running game last year, similar to LSU, not up to expectations. That's not what you expect from a football program of the Alabama Crimson Tide to run the ball, especially with the weapons that they had back there. You had two running backs who were getting all sorts, Justice Haynes, Jan Miller, all sorts of praise in the preseason. And then it was just there was a couple games where it was pretty good, but we've talked about it before on this show. Jalen Milrose, the leading rusher on the team, right? He's an incredible runner. I'm not taking anything away from him, but when the quarterback is the leading rusher on the team and you've got a couple guys in the stable, who really aren't able to establish the run, that's on the offensive line. So I think Alabama has a lot of work to do to help break in a new quarterback with that run game. They've got to get better along the offensive line. They brought in Cam Dewberry from Texas A&M. They tried to shore up that offensive line in the offseason. So they need the big boys to be pushing up front. They need to be able to establish the run to take the pressure off of whoever is going to be the starting quarterback.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think you're spot on there, and especially too. Hey, look, if it is Simpson, he's not a runner, so your leading rusher, and I don't think Austin Mack is either. I think he's maybe more mobile than Simpson, but I would not expect any of these guys. Maybe Keelan Russell. I know he's a bit more dynamic, but none of these guys are going to lead Alabama in rushing this coming season. So
no,
they have to find it somewhere else, and that starts with offensive line and running backs. So that's a good point. So we'll move on here to kind of the back half and probably go a little bit faster here. But I'll just start out. I had LaNorris Sellers at 5. You had him at 7. Again, we're probably splitting hairs here. Just my perspective on that was because of how he played last year and how South Carolina won 9 games, the expectations are very high. We see this all the time in college football. Every fan base does it. If your team and or specific players have a great season, you expect them to repeat and improve upon that. So the expectation of him to improve on what he did this past year will be there. And I just think that's a lot of pressure because he had a great season. So for him to repeat that would be awesome. And that puts a lot of pressure on him, especially to take it back to what I was saying a little bit about Georgia and how I think they can win games, without great quarterback play. I don't think South Carolina's in that boat. So he's going to have to, repeat his performance and also shoulder a ton of that load on offense for South Carolina for them to, win 8, 9, 10, whatever number of games it is, because they're going to have to put a lot on his plate and rely on him to do a ton both through the air and with his legs in 2025.
Yeah, I won't say too much more on that. Only to say that there is pressure on him, like you said, to improve. He showed a lot of great stuff this year, especially with his legs. A couple times he showed it with his arm, right? He showed he's got the talent with his arm, especially in the Texas A&M game. He started carving up A&M at different points during that game when A&M started bringing pressure to try to to stop him on the ground. But I think that he has to improve as a passer if South Carolina is going to maintain and potentially take that next step. I mean, you're right on the verge of the playoffs this last year, and I keep harping on it, but the SEC refs completely stole that game for them against LSU. And if they beat LSU, they're in the playoff. So in year one, LaNorris Sellers had South Carolina right on the verge of the playoff. And I think there's a real chance that he can't get them there in year 2 of being the starter, but he's got to make that leap in the passing game. And he's going to have the weapons to do it. A lot of weapons returning for South Carolina on the outside at wide receiver. You got Nichols Harbor, a couple others who are coming back who, have a lot of experience. So he's got the weapons to do it. He's got to improve in the passing game if he's going to take some of that pressure off him and keep South Carolina where they are and keep them improving.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next one we can touch on here is another one I did not include in my top 8, but you have Austin Simmons sitting there at number 6. So would love to just hear, your case or what you're thinking about for Austin Simmons and Ole Miss in 2025.
Sure. Just to recap here, he's the ones that we disagreed on were Georgia and Ole Miss, and then also Jackson Arnold, who you had Jackson Arnold on. I did not. I put him on an honorable mention, and DJ Lagway as well. We only chose 8 here, guys, tonight, as you can see. We only ranked 8. Of course, we could rank all the way to 16, but we chose the top 8 that we thought were under the most pressure. So I think that you could absolutely put DJ Lagway and Jackson Arnold. You can make a great argument for those guys to be on the list, and I'll let you make that argument here in just a minute. But Austin Simmons, I had him on there, and then you did not. You had Jackson Arnold up there and DJ Lagway up there instead of my Georgia and instead of Austin Simmons. So Austin Simmons for me, I'm looking at where the Ole Miss program is. There's for Ole Miss is expecting to win at least 10 games, double-digit win seasons. Like that's the expectation now. That's where Lane has raised the expectation to. Whether or not that's going to be the case next year, we'll see. I think last year's team was probably the best team talent-wise that Ole Miss has ever had on campus, and they didn't get it done. They didn't get to the playoffs. So expectations may be lowered a little bit this year. I think way too early preseason top 25s had Ole Miss somewhere between like 18 to 25, 24, somewhere in that range. However, Ole Miss is losing a lot, but Austin Simmons has a lot of hype coming in here. That one drive against Georgia where he drives them down. I mean, everybody know that's going to be on replay, right, throughout the offseason for all Ole Miss fans. Everyone was unbelievably excited about that for a good reason. It was very impressive. He's the new Ryan Williams. He's only 17 years old, right? The kid is very young. He graduated, I think he was on campus at Ole Miss when he was 16 or something crazy. He's uber talented. And not to mention, he also, like Brian Kelly, put national title expectations on himself when he put out that Instagram that, went viral and all over Twitter when folks took the screenshot of it. So I think Austin Simmons, just because of where fan expectations are, where the Ole Miss program is, the expectations for the program, and then, bottle on top of that, all the hype that surrounds Austin Simmons. And, also, though, that it's all that hype, it's much like Arch Manning in this respect. All that hype is coming from very small sample size, right? So there's a lot of mystery there of like, what is this actually going to look like? We saw one drive that looked amazing. We're hearing he looks great in practice. For Arch Manning, he had a couple starts, right? He looks great in practice, but how does that look over the course of a full season? We'll see. So I just think that, a couple of those different reasons that I stated, where Ole Miss is at as a program and where they want to stay. Ole Miss wants to make the playoffs. They want to be one of those, perennial teams that are on the verge, if not in the playoffs. That's why they hired Lane Kiffin. That's why they spent all that money in NIL. That's why they, have the Grove Collective. So I think there's a lot of pressure on Austin Simmons this year.
Yeah, I think that's fair in terms of, just sort of how you were your thought process there around fan expectations and the hype surrounding him. He does have a lot of hype. That drive against Georgia fueled that flame. My kind of reasoning for letting him or not putting him up there, and you'll see, I think that the last three picks of mine, that I ultimately put ahead of Simmons, a lot of it was based around coaching kind of hot seat stuff. And I think, as you mentioned, the expectations of Ole Miss, yes, are to win 10 games and get to the playoff. If they win 7 games this year and Austin Simmons does not do well, Lane Kiffin's fine, right? Mm-hmm. And to me, I factored that in a lot of like just the pressure on the individual player of like, it's of course, it's a ton of pressure. Like, you're the Ole Miss quarterback in Lane Kiffin's offense. He has great quarterbacks. They have a high-flying offense, typically. So there's very high expectations, and pressure comes along with high expectations. However, I don't know if, human nature, right? Like, if I fall short here, maybe my own, he's probably not going to stay at Ole Miss if he has a bad season, but they win 6 or 7 games, like, Kiffin's fine. And I kind of factor that in, especially, again, as we're getting down the list here, kind of splitting hairs, and that's why I went with guys that are more tightly tied to the fate of their head coach on, fair. The number of wins they get. But I agree with, everything you said there in terms of why there's pressure on him, in particular, the self-imposed pressure that he, said they're going to a national title. So I think all that is fair.
I'll let you explain, talk more about Jackson Arnold here, maybe even Mateer here in a second. And I know we gotta move quickly, but one we also could mention, if in terms of your criteria that you just mentioned, is Zach Calzada with Kentucky. Because I think I don't know if we're on the verge of firing, Mark Stoops here, but there's rumblings. Like, it's not a perfect marriage right now in Lexington. So, I think Zach Calzada is he's playing for a lot. He's got a lot of pressure on him because there's a lot of pressure right now on Mark Stoops to get things at Kentucky back to where they were.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think, if we were to go further down the list, or, as you put in some honorable mentions, I think Calzada would be in there. Yeah. The reason that I had Lagway, Mateer, and Arnold, ahead of him is because Calzada was a 3-star recruit, played a long time at A&M, I think three seasons. Then he was at Auburn. Then he was at Incarnate Word Division III for the last 2 years. So the pressure is on him, as you said, internally at Kentucky to perform, because there's some, what do you call them? Tremors before an earthquake going on potentially in Lexington. I just don't think outside of Lexington or even maybe, you know, not in the building, but outside of Lexington, like people are not expecting him to have a really, really good season. Whereas Lagway, Mateer, and Arnold, I think, are. So I'll start with Lagway. We saw last year what he's capable of, even, you know, kind of on one leg. He was a 5-star recruit, number 1 QB, I think, in his class. I guess depends on what service you look at, but most people would have considered him the number 1 QB in the 24 class, I guess it was. He showed a lot of signs of that last year. So similar to what I said about Sellers, the expectation is he is going to equal and improve that performance from last year. And then I think you add on, as we mentioned last week with Napier, like, hey, Napier did a great job in 2024 and he saved his job, but he still has like a 500 record and he's going into year 4 at University of Florida. So a bad season here, Lagway could see his coach be on the chopping block. Similar, again, I'll keep it pretty brief here, but same with Mateer and Arnold. Mateer, his case is a little different because actually they're both transfers, but Mateer's coming from outside the SEC, had a good year at Washington State, which, by the way, was left for dead after the Pac-12 dissolved. Nobody thought they were going to be good. They were pretty good. Mateer was a big part of that. They bring his offensive coordinator. They bring him to Oklahoma with a coach squarely on the hot seat. Their offense was terrible last year. They need him to perform to save their jobs. I think there's just a lot of pressure on him. And then same with Arnold, right? Hugh Freeze going into year 3. I think he's right at 500, maybe even a little bit below. He has a worse record than Brian Harsin. Arnold, former 5-star, does have experience. I just think the pressure is on him, especially with, even you and I have talked about this, you know, Oklahoma, especially on offense, was such a mess last year. Like a lot of people, and I feel like we're half in and half out on this boat, but like kind of give him a pass and be like, well, was it really his fault? Was it really Jackson Arnold's fault? Like he was a 5-star. He has a big arm. He can run too. Like he looks like he has all the tools. Maybe it was just a bad fit. Maybe the offense was a mess, which it was. And so he still has a little bit of cachet where people think back to, you know, what he was as a recruit and kind of project that out. And, you know, I think the tendency is, you know, with a lot of these guys, every fan base does it. And I think most media members do it, but like you tend to look at a guy and place expectations on him based on his ceiling or the best that he has shown. Mm-hmm. And Jackson Arnold, you know, has shown some good things and was a big time recruit. So people look at him and think he should be really good. And you kind of sweep under the rug some of the stuff that's like, oh yeah, but he did this and he did that and he did that, you know what I mean? Where you just kind of give them the benefit of the doubt if they're uber talented. Yeah. And I think he, you know, fits that perfectly where Hugh Freeze needs a good season. Jackson Arnold on paper looks like the perfect guy to do it. And Auburn, like every program in the SEC, expects and wants to win at a high level. And so I just think he's got some pressure on him for sure.
You know, this reminds me of Scam Newton. I'm just kidding.
Was it the Harvey Updike, what he said, best player money can buy?
Yeah. I'm joking about that. The only reason that it reminds me of Cam Newton is Cam was a massive recruit and he transferred into Auburn. And what happened, right? When he transferred into Auburn, he takes a bad coach all the way to the national championship and they win it, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that Jackson Arnold is Cam Newton, just to be clear. I'm joking. The only you know, but hey, it could happen, right? Like no one had really seen a lot of Cam Newton at all until he got to Auburn, except for folks who followed the JUCO circuit at Blinn. But I actually really do see the parallels between Jackson Arnold and another recent kid who came to the SEC and kind of resurrected a program, or at least elevated it, which is Spencer Rattler. Spencer Rattler, who was at Oklahoma when it was a Big 12 program, 5-star, big-time recruit, right? Has everybody's, you know, giving him all the love in the world, all the flowers. comes in and struggles, and eventually is taken over, and he transfers, leaves. He goes to South Carolina, and he has 2 great years at South Carolina, kind of changes his attitude, and ends up being an NFL. He probably will be a starter in the NFL at some point. So I can see Jackson Arnold having a similar trajectory. And it's a similar marriage in a sense where Shane Beamer was certainly on the hot seat when he got Spencer Rattler, right? He kind of teetering. He was fairly new. I think it was year 3, maybe, right?
2 or 3. I don't remember the exact timelines, but Rattler was there for 2 years. In his first year, they had a good year. They beat Tennessee, they beat Clemson, and all was well.
That's right. So, but there was still like, I think 2, 3, there was still some, we'll see about Shane Beamer kind of stuff, right?
For sure.
So Spencer comes in, kind of resurrects the program. Could be the same thing here. Jury's out on Hugh Freeze, right? We'll see what happens. Bad year, he could totally be gone. This is Auburn, right? So he brings in Jackson Arnold, who's got a really big ceiling. Highest ceiling, most talented quarterback that Hugh Freeze has coached in probably a really long time. Even more talented, I would say, higher ceiling than Malik Willis, who he coached at Liberty, right? Like, who is the most talented quarterback?
It's him or Swag Kelly. Yeah, I was going to say it. I think it's Arnold or Swag Kelly, and I think most talent evaluators or scouts would say Arnold is more talented. Whether he proves to be a better quarterback, we'll see, because I don't know if he's got as much swag as Swag Kelly. I mean, that guy, he could sling the ball, and he was not scared of anything. But to your point,
yes, as much swag as Swag Kelly, much confidence in Swag.
To your point, in terms of talent, I think most people would say Arnold.
Yeah. So I'm with you. I think he does have some pressure on him here, but it is a new start for him, which is good. To quote Tobias Funke. But
and it's tart.
If no one gets that joke, Arrested Development, check it out. What a great show! And I hope
you
got that.
Dozens of us.
If you got that joke, you're in the right place. But for Jackson Arnold, he does have some pressure. It's a new place, new start for him, which I think takes a little bit of pressure off of him, right? Which is a good thing. I think Hugh Freeze can kind of like do the meme, right, where he's the soldier and he's taking all the knives for the kid.
Yeah.
And just say, hey, Jackson, go out there and play your game, man. Like, you came here, it's all on me. Look, he's also going to have a lot of weapons, right? He's going to have weapons galore, 2 5-star receivers on the outside. I think they got another one. He's got a plethora of weapons. He's got an embarrassment of riches there. So if he can't do it at Auburn, he just didn't have it. So we'll see. Going to be really, really fun to watch next year to see what Auburn can do, because it's a big year for Hugh Freeze. That's where the pressure comes from, because it's a big year for Hugh Freeze.
Yeah, I totally agree. So we'll make this quick, but we're going to hop into basketball now with a quick break before we do for an ad read. So Biscuits and SEC Live, we're brought to you by the Steer Agency. Football is all about strategy, just like winning in business. Whether you're dialing up the perfect play on Saturdays or looking to dominate in public affairs, PR, or digital marketing, you need a team that delivers results. That's where the Steer Agency comes in. They craft winning strategies that get you seen, heard, and ahead of the competition. Don't just play the game, control it. Visit thesteeragency.com today and take your brand to the next level. All right. SEC basketball. So,
Steer.
As we mentioned, SEC tournament begins next week. I think Monday, maybe Tuesday. If I'm off, I can't remember, but maybe Tuesday, because it'll end on Saturday or Sunday,
right
before Selection Sunday, and then we go into the tournament. So try to keep this brief. We do have a biscuit of the week that we'll knock out before the end of the show, but we got a nice graphic here to kind of talk about, bracketology, where things are looking. Joe Lunardi has 10 SEC teams that he believes are in as locks. As you can see here, Auburn, Tennessee, Florida, Bama, Mizzou, Kentucky, A&M, Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, Ole Miss. And then he has 4 teams on the bubble: Arkansas, Oklahoma, Georgia, and Texas. And as of his, Monday bracketology, like I said, he's got 10 teams for sure in, and he was predicting that 2 of those 4 bubble teams will also find a way in, which would leave 12 SEC teams in the field of 68 now, I guess, with the play. But that's pretty remarkable as to be this deep and potentially get 12, 13, or 14 teams in the field.
It's absolutely absurd when you think about it. The SEC is so unbelievably deep this year. It's the deepest it's ever been. It's been so much fun watching these teams play each other. It's crazy to me to look up at the scoreboard, right, or to look ahead to, okay, who's playing this week, and see like 3 ranked on ranked matchups inside the SEC. Like we're just not used to seeing that. But it's a new day, and this conference is full of very good coaches and, very deep with a lot of talent. So it's been a lot of fun to watch. I think I forget, we were talking about this earlier before the show, but the SEC is, I think, doubling the next highest conference that would get at least P4, right? The ACC, I think you said, was 3. The Big Ten was like 6. And there's one other one I'm forgetting, who, the Big 12. There's no way the Big 12's getting in that many.
Yeah, so just looking at Lenardi's, I don't see, for whatever reason, on what he put out on Monday, I don't see the Big Ten, so I'm not sure what he's projecting they will get in, but he's projecting he projects the Big 12. He says they have 6 teams that are locked into the field with a couple on the bubble. He's predicting they will get 8 teams in, and then the ACC, he's only predicting that Duke, Clemson, and Louisville will make the tournament. So I don't know where the Big Ten stands, but I feel like, anecdotally, not that I've watched a lot of Big Ten basketball this winter, but I think they are down relative to what they normally are. I know, trying to think here off the dome, Wisconsin is good. I think Michigan State is pretty good. I think Purdue, even coming off the title, they're not elite, but I think they'll be in the field. I don't think Indiana will be in there.
Indiana's 11 seed right now. I'm looking at Lenardi's. So Indiana maybe. That's flirting with the bubble. Ohio State's flirting with the bubble. So, but anyway, my point is, the SEC is basically doubling all. We'll see how it shakes out at the end of the day, but the SEC is basically doubling all Power 4 conferences, the other 3 Power 4 conferences, in terms of getting teams in the field, which is just incredible. And I know too that we've got number 5 Florida playing number 7 Alabama here in the second half. So we'll get out of here soon so that everybody can go watch that game. But we've also got a bunch of good games too, or at least ones that matter ahead of the SEC tournament. One of them being number 1 Auburn versus number 7 Alabama coming up on Saturday. That's a big one, 2:30 Central Time on ESPN. And then you also have Arkansas and Mississippi State, number 25 Mississippi State versus Arkansas at noon on SEC Network on Saturday. Arkansas on the bubble, Mississippi State, they should be in the field, but that's a big one for Arkansas. And then, for these bubble teams that you had on that graphic, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Georgia, Texas, it's a big couple days and then a big time going into the SEC tournament, right? That's going to be a lot of fun. You got to keep your eye on those teams, especially since they're kind of on the edge. And then there'll be fun things too, like Texas A&M. Can Texas A&M get hot again after their huge win over number 1 Auburn the other night? Lose 4 straight, beat number 1 Auburn. If you get hot, go out and win the SEC tournament, right, or get to the SEC tournament final. Instead of being a 4 seed like you are now, you could find yourself right back there again, being in the 2 seed level.
Yeah.
So a lot of fun things to watch for over the next week here.
Yeah, so I'm just looking at it now so we can confirm here. The tournament starts next Wednesday. The SEC tournament does. It will conclude on Sunday. So they'll be playing the midday slot on Selection Sunday before the final brackets are out. So next week, we'll have to come up with some stuff to talk about, but I have a feeling we'll be talking a lot about those opening round games that will be taking place on Wednesday and during the show. So definitely be sure to tune into that. It's been great. And we'll talk a little bit of baseball in the coming weeks as well as that's heating up. But excited for March Madness and the SEC tournament. Like the next couple of weeks are some of the best weeks of the year. When you go conference tournament straight into March Madness, it's just wall to wall basketball, upsets, storylines. It's the best. So really looking forward to that, especially with so many SEC teams, in the hunt really for deep runs in the tournament. So that is basically our show. I will close this out here. We don't have a Muschamp Coach of the Week, which is, pretty typical for an off season. So if something happens out there that you think we should be aware of that, is a Muschamp Coach of the Week nomination worthy, hit us up, social media, email, whatever it is, and we'll be happy to include it. But as of now, we don't have anything. But we do have a Biscuit of the Week. So I recently moved up to Fort Collins, so I've been trying out the local fare. And this past Sunday, before church, stopped in at Mountain Cafe in Fort Collins. And as you can see, this is current picture of the interior of this place. So hasn't been updated since 1985, which is just how I like it. I wouldn't have it any other way. And it's a little hard to see. My biscuits are kind of buried in the sausage gravy there, but what I ordered was it was 2 eggs scrambled over top of 2 biscuits covered in sausage gravy with some hash browns. So very good. I like that style of hash brown. I don't know about you. I know, it's more popular these days to do like the little square chunks, like home fries, they call them typically, but that's like the Waffle House style that I grew up on, just the shredded hash browns, fried to a crisp on either side. Fantastic. Not quite as good as the Lucille's Cajun Cafe from whatever that was 2 weeks ago, but definitely worth the stop in if you're ever in Fort Collins is Mountain Cafe. Also, probably as you would expect, just seeing the inside of their establishment, phenomenal prices. I think it was less than $10 for an entree, which is unheard of in today's economy. So,
yeah, no kidding. That looked fantastic to me. It looked simple, to the point, no frills. This is what you get, right? So that looked great to me. I'm with you too on anything that can be modeled after Waffle House. I'm in. So Waffle House hash browns, give me that. They look like they crisped them up just perfect. So shout out to them. That looked like a solid spot.
Yeah, it was very good. Shout out to Mountain Cafe. Cool. Well, that will do it. Appreciate everybody tuning in, especially during the off season, for sticking with us. Please, give us a like if you're on YouTube. Go to our YouTube channel at Biscuits and SEC. Subscribe, leave a comment. That all, of course, just helps us out. So if you like what we are doing, please do that. Be sure to tune in tomorrow night to SEC After Dark at 9 Eastern, 8 Central, where we'll join up with the rest of the crew that on SEC After Dark. And I'm sure we'll get into a bunch of, football and as well as basketball stuff with the rest of the guys tomorrow night. So with that, I think we will close it out, but appreciate y'all joining in. For Bossman, I'm Hammer. Take care, y'all.
See y'all next week.